Welcome to Knowledge and Power. Silence in the face of suffering isn't neutrality, it's betrayal. Those who ignored your pain thought they escaped the fight, but karma ensures no one avoids the reckoning. There's something deeply unsettling about the silence of those who could have helped but chose not to. To the chosen ones reading this, you were thrown into the fire by bullies who thrived on your pain. But what stung even more? The cowards who stood by, watched, and pretended not to see. They thought their inaction would protect them, that staying on the sidelines made them invisible. But the truth? Karma never forgets, and their silence has consequences. You're called the chosen ones because your trials shaped you into something stronger, something sharper. You've carried the weight of betrayal and indifference, and now the scales are tipping in your favor. This video isn't just about justice, it's about reclaiming your power. The universe has a funny way of leveling the playing field, and you deserve to see it unfold. Watch this, not out of bitterness, but to remind yourself that you were always more courageous than those who hid behind silence. This is your time. Number 1. Karma's currency is accountability, and the bill is overdue. Karma has a way of balancing the scales, especially when accountability is long overdue. The cowards who stood by while you suffered thought they had escaped unscathed. They convinced themselves that silence was safety, that staying uninvolved made them innocent. But here's the truth. Every time they ignored your pain, they were racking up a debt with karma, and now the bill has arrived. They lived comfortably in their bubble, avoiding confrontation, pretending your struggle wasn't their problem. Meanwhile, you paid the price, mentally, emotionally, and even physically. You bore the weight of bullying, isolation, and betrayal, while they enjoyed the false luxury of indifference. What they didn't realize is that karma's currency is accountability. It doesn't matter if they didn't swing the fist or hurl the insults, they chose inaction. And that's a choice with consequences. Every time they looked the other way, they contributed to your suffering, feeding the power of the bullies. Now the roles have shifted. The universe has a way of ensuring people reap what they sow, even when they thought they were planting nothing. Karma doesn't work on their timeline. It waits until they're least prepared. That false sense of security they clung to is shattering, forcing them to confront what they tried to avoid. The comfort they once had is slipping through their fingers, replaced by the very fear and vulnerability they ignored in you. It's poetic justice, not out of revenge, but because balance demands it. Their silence wasn't harmless, it was harmful. And now, they'll learn what it feels like to carry the weight of indifference, just as you did. They can no longer live rent-free in the comfort of apathy. Karma has come to collect. Number 2. They didn't realize they were next. The ones who stayed silent when you needed them most thought they were playing it smart. They believed their silence was their shield, keeping them safe from the bullies who tormented you. After all, if they didn't step in, didn't pick a side, they wouldn't be a target, right? Wrong. What they didn't realize is that bullies don't respect the quiet ones. They don't honor neutrality or reward passivity. Bullies thrive on weakness, and silence is their favorite kind. By ignoring your pain, these cowards thought they were dodging trouble, but they were only delaying the inevitable. Bullies see silent bystanders as nothing more than easy prey. The same people who stood back and let you take the hits are now finding themselves in your shoes, facing the wrath of the very tormentors they avoided confronting. The bullies haven't changed their ways. They've simply shifted their focus. And now the cowards have no one to stand up for them because they never stood up for anyone else. It's a hard lesson, but one they need to learn. Silence doesn't buy immunity. Bullies don't respect cowardice, they exploit it. Those who ignored your suffering were never safe, they were simply next in line. Their silence wasn't a defense, it was an invitation, a bright neon sign that said, "I won't fight back." Now they're realizing what you already knew. Facing a bully alone is terrifying, only now their cries for help echo into the same void they left you in. The karma in this isn't cruel, it's justice. The cowards who thought they were untouchable are finally learning the cost of inaction. Their silence didn't protect them, it made them vulnerable. And now, they're paying the price. Number 3. the consequence of being a ghost. Cowards often believe that fading into the background makes them invisible, that staying out of sight somehow absolves them of responsibility. When you needed a shield, someone to step forward to say, "This isn't right," they chose to become ghosts. They didn't act, didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge your pain. But disappearing wasn't the escape they thought it was. In their attempt to avoid the conflict, they abandoned you to face the full force of the bullies alone. They pretended it wasn't their fight, telling themselves it wasn't their job to protect you. What they didn't realize was that their refusal to act wasn't neutral, it was a betrayal. By fading away, they made the bullies stronger and left you defenseless. Now the ghosts they tried to become are coming back to haunt them. The fear they avoided confronting for you, the dread of stepping in, of standing out, of risking something, is now their shadow. That same fear is eating away at them, growing louder and more relentless as they face their own struggles. There's no peace in being a ghost. Silence doesn't erase guilt, and avoidance doesn't kill consequences. The very thing they were running from, the responsibility to act, is catching up with them. The guilt of their inaction has taken a form they can't outrun, and now they're haunted by the memory of what they didn't do, the moments they failed to be a shield when it mattered most. Being a ghost doesn't mean you disappear. It means you're trapped in the weight of what you left behind. Their time to fade into the background is over. Karma is dragging them into the light to face the consequences of their cowardice. Number 4, cowards always mistake neutrality for innocence. Cowards often cling to the illusion that staying neutral absolves them of responsibility. They tell themselves they weren't part of the problem because they didn't actively contribute to the harm. But what they fail to understand is that neutrality in the face of injustice isn't innocence. It's complicity in disguise. By staying silent, they made a choice. By refusing to stand up, they sided with the oppressor. When you were being hurt, ignored, or humiliated, their refusal to act wasn't harmless. It was fuel for the bullies. Every second they stood by and did nothing, they sent a silent message that what was happening was acceptable. They convinced themselves their hands were clean, but karma sees through the act. Excuses like, "It wasn't my fight," or "I didn't want to make things worse," won't hold up when the truth is laid bare. Neutrality isn't safety. It's an accomplice dressed in a coward's cloak. And now, the reckoning begins. Karma doesn't need loud announcements or grand gestures. It moves quietly, letting them feel the weight of their choices in ways they can't escape. The discomfort they once avoided is now their reality, and no amount of denial can shield them from the consequences. Their neutrality was a mask they wore to avoid confrontation, but it's one that karma tears away. What's left is the truth. They weren't bystanders, they were enablers. They stood in the shadow of injustice, thinking they could avoid the storm, only to realize too late that their inaction has placed them squarely in its path. Neutrality is never innocent, and karma ensures that those who refuse to take a stand eventually find themselves on the wrong side of history. Number 5. Empathy is a muscle, and theirs atrophied. Empathy is like a muscle. It grows stronger the more it's used. It requires effort, courage, and an ability to step outside yourself to truly feel for others. But the cowards who watched your pain and did nothing let that muscle wither away. They chose apathy over action, turning a blind eye to your suffering, convincing themselves it wasn't their problem. Each time they ignored your struggles, their capacity for compassion shrank. Now, karma has arrived to test their resilience, and they're crumbling under the weight of their own trials. Why? Because empathy isn't just about helping others. It's also what strengthens us to handle our own battles. By refusing to step in when you needed them, they robbed themselves of the emotional fortitude to face life's inevitable hardships. They've never practiced standing up for someone else, so how can they expect to stand up for themselves now? When karma delivers their share of pain, they're left feeling isolated and weak, the same way they left you. The fear and vulnerability you endured are now theirs to bear, but without the empathy they chose to ignore, they lack the strength to navigate it. They never built the emotional stamina to face adversity, because they spent so long pretending it didn't exist. Their atrophied empathy leaves them hollow, unable to connect or find support when they need it most. The lesson here is harsh but necessary. Ignoring someone's pain doesn't make you immune to your own. It only ensures you'll face it alone, unprepared, and without the tools to endure. Karma doesn't forget, and in the end, the weight of their indifference is a burden they'll have to carry alone. Number 6. Ignoring pain doesn't immunize you against it. Ignoring someone else's pain doesn't make you immune to your own. The ones who turned their backs on your suffering thought they were safe, that by staying out of it, they could avoid the ugliness of conflict. They convinced themselves that pain wasn't their responsibility, that it wouldn't touch them if they looked the other way. But pain has a way of spreading, like a fire that feeds on silence, and now it's burned its way into their lives. When they ignored your struggles, they believed it was a choice without consequences. They didn't see that their indifference allowed the bullies to grow bolder, the problem to grow bigger, and the pain to become a force too large to contain. They may have pretended it wasn't their problem, but pain doesn't care about boundaries. By enabling cruelty through silence, they unknowingly invited its shadow into their own backyard. Now, karma has brought that pain to their doorstep. There's no hiding from it, no pretending it doesn't exist. The very thing they thought they'd avoided is staring them in the face, and they're ill-equipped to handle it. They spent so long avoiding discomfort that they never learned how to endure it. The fear and anguish they dismissed in you are now reflected in their own lives, leaving them vulnerable and unprotected. Ignoring someone's suffering doesn't create safety. It creates a ticking time bomb. Pain is a force that demands attention, and when it's ignored, it finds new ways to make itself known. The ones who abandoned you to your struggles are now learning that pain, once ignored, doesn't disappear. It multiplies, grows, and eventually finds its way to those who thought they were untouchable. Their reckoning isn't cruel, it's inevitable. Number 7. The universe saw what you couldn't. When they chose to ignore your suffering, acting like it wasn't their problem, they thought they had escaped judgment. They thought their silence would blend into the background, unnoticed and forgotten. But the universe doesn't operate that way. It sees what you couldn't. Every moment they turned away, every time they avoided stepping in, every excuse they whispered to themselves to justify their inaction. The universe keeps a record, and karma moves on its own schedule. Even when no one called them out in the moment, their silence was never harmless. They may have thought they were off the hook because no one confronted them, but the universe doesn't forget. It watches, it waits, and it knows when the time is right to act. Karma isn't bound by human timelines or convenience. It delivers justice when it's least expected but most deserved. While they were busy pretending to be blind to your struggles, they were writing their own fate. Their inaction wasn't invisible, even if it seemed like no one noticed at the time. The universe doesn't need public recognition to balance the scales. It sees the truth for what it is, regardless of appearances. Now, karma is unfolding, and they're facing the consequences of their indifference. They're learning the hard way that ignoring someone's pain doesn't erase their responsibility. It amplifies it. They had their chance to step up, to be human, to offer even the smallest bit of compassion, but they chose the easy way out. What they didn't realize is that the universe never looks away. Their reckoning isn't about revenge, it's about restoring balance. They may have fooled themselves, but they never fooled the universe. Number 8. False comforts come with expiry dates. Cowardice often disguises itself as self-preservation. For those who turned a blind eye to your suffering, their inaction felt like a shield, something to protect them from getting involved, from risking confrontation, or from feeling the discomfort of empathy. Ignoring your pain became their comfort zone, a fragile cocoon where they convinced themselves they were safe. But comfort built on the foundation of someone else's suffering is always temporary. What they didn't realize is that their shield wasn't made of strength or resolve. It was made of fear. Fear of stepping up, fear of standing out, fear of doing what was right when it mattered most. And fear, no matter how thick it feels, can't hold back the weight of karma forever. Now, the cracks are showing. The false sense of security they wrap themselves in is falling apart. Karma doesn't forget the choices people make to protect themselves at the expense of others. The weight of their silence, their apathy, and their refusal to act has become too much for their flimsy shield to bear. They thought they were safe because they didn't say anything, didn't get involved, didn't make a scene. But karma doesn't care about their excuses or the lies they told themselves to sleep better at night. It only sees the truth. They failed to act when they were needed most. Now they're left exposed, vulnerable, and forced to confront the consequences of their inaction. That false comfort they relied on has expired, and there's no hiding behind it anymore. Karma is relentless, and it has a way of teaching lessons they avoided learning on their own. Their shield of cowardice is gone, and the reckoning they tried to avoid is staring them in the face. Number 9. You were the test they failed miserably. Life is full of tests, moments that define who we are and what we stand for. The ones who ignored you when you needed them most were given a chance, a clear opportunity to do the right thing. But they failed miserably. It wasn't about picking a side or even getting involved in a conflict. It was simply about showing basic human decency. But they chose to turn away, to hide behind their comfort, to pretend your pain wasn't their concern. And now, that failure isn't just a missed opportunity. It's a consequence they can't escape. Their punishment isn't about vengeance or revenge. It's about justice. Karma doesn't need anger to work its way into their lives. It simply demands balance. Their failure to act when you needed them is now coming full circle, and the universe doesn't ask for permission to restore fairness. They failed the test. They were supposed to show strength, courage, and empathy. Instead, they showed fear, cowardice, and a lack of responsibility. They thought they could dodge the impact of their inaction. They didn't realize that life keeps score, and the price of failing to stand up for others is always paid in ways they didn't see coming. Now, karma isn't punishing them for the sake of cruelty. It's teaching them a lesson they didn't take seriously the first time. The test was theirs to pass, but they failed it. Justice doesn't need justification. It just needs the truth. And the truth is, they failed when they had the chance to rise. Now, they'll feel the weight of that failure. Number 10. Karma isn't a villain, it's a mirror. Karma isn't some vengeful force out to get people. It's more like a mirror. It doesn't create pain, it reflects it. The hurt they're feeling now isn't an act of cruelty. It's simply their own apathy being returned to them, a reflection of the indifference they once chose. When they stood by and watched you suffer, they didn't realize that by refusing to engage, they were planting seeds of their own eventual reckoning. Now, that same emptiness they ignored in you has come back to haunt them, and they have no one to blame but themselves. They never understood that choosing to be silent in the face of someone's pain doesn't make the problem go away. It magnifies it, turning it into something that will eventually find its way back to you. The universe doesn't need to be cruel. It just has to show them the consequences of their own choices. They didn't step in when you needed them, and now the indifference they once allowed to thrive around them is coming back, forcing them to face the same cold isolation they let you endure. What they're experiencing now isn't punishment. It's simply the law of cause and effect. The mirror of karma doesn't lie. It shows them who they truly were when they failed to be there for you. And now, they have to live with that reflection, feeling the same neglect they so carelessly overlooked. Karma isn't out to get them, it's just showing them the truth of their actions, whether they like it or not. Number 11. Your bullies planted the seeds, but they watered them. The cowards who stayed silent didn't directly bully you, but their inaction played a crucial role in feeding the cruelty. By refusing to speak out, by pretending your pain wasn't their problem, they gave the bullies more power. Their silence wasn't neutral, it was a green light, a permission slip that allowed the bullies to keep going. Every time they stayed quiet, they watered the seeds of your suffering, nurturing the confidence of those who chose to hurt you. They might not have swung the bat themselves, but they handed it over, giving the bullies the confidence to strike without fear of consequence. The reality is, Every time someone stands by and watches injustice unfold, they become complicit. They may not have actively participated in the cruelty, but their refusal to intervene made the situation worse. They failed to challenge the bullies, to say, "This isn't right," or to protect you when you were vulnerable. In doing so, they inadvertently empowered the ones causing the harm. Now, as karma unfolds, the cowards are learning a harsh truth. Their silence was never a shield. It didn't protect them. It only made them part of the problem. The bullies might have thrown the punches, but it was the cowards who created the environment where those punches could land. And now, as the seeds of their own failure begin to sprout, they're realizing the cost of turning a blind eye when they had the chance to act. Number 12. Now they understand the price of not my problem. They thought staying uninvolved would keep them safe, that by saying not my problem, they could avoid the messiness of conflict or responsibility. But what they didn't realize is that each time they chose to look the other way, each time they shrugged off someone else's suffering, they were stacking up a debt they'd eventually have to pay. Karma doesn't forget those moments of indifference, and now it's showing them exactly how every not my problem moment adds up. It's not just a pass, it's an accumulation of missed opportunities to stand up, to help, to do what was right. Now that pile of ignored moments is crashing down on them. What they thought was a safe distance from responsibility has become their burden to bear. The consequences of their apathy have found their way to their doorstep, and they can't avoid it anymore. Karma isn't punishing them out of spite. It's holding them accountable for the simple act of choosing to do nothing when they had the chance to make a difference. By pretending something wasn't their problem, they allowed it to grow into a problem they could no longer ignore. Now it's in their face, and they're realizing that avoiding involvement doesn't shield you from the fallout, it invites it. The truth is, there's no such thing as neutrality when it comes to injustice. Choosing to be uninvolved is still a choice. And now they're learning the hard way that every moment they said, "Not my problem," has become a weight they can no longer bear. In conclusion, in the end, the truth is simple. The ones who stood by and let your pain go unnoticed are now facing the consequences of their silence. They may have thought their cowardice would shield them, but all it did was make them complicit. Karma isn't about revenge, it's about balance, and it's showing them exactly what they chose to ignore. The ones who refused to step up when you needed them most are now learning that inaction has its price. But here's where you stand apart. You are the chosen one in this story, the one who endured when others wouldn't. You didn't deserve the suffering, but you've come through it stronger, wiser, and more resilient. You didn't need them to stand up for you, because you found your own voice, your own strength. Now karma is doing the heavy lifting, teaching those who watch from the sidelines the lesson they wouldn't learn on their own. You're not defined by their actions or inactions. You're defined by your ability to rise above, to push through, and to understand that your worth isn't tied to the opinions or choices of the cowardly. The pain they caused you is no longer yours to carry. It's theirs now. And while they're learning their lesson, you're stepping into a future where their shadows have no place. Remember, you are the one who kept going when others stayed behind. You are the one who learned the hard way, but came out with something they'll never have: strength, resilience, and the wisdom to never settle for the silence of the cowardly. You are the chosen one because you didn't give up. Now, let their karma unfold while you walk forward stronger than ever. The past doesn't define you. The way you rise from it does. Keep moving forward because your journey is far from over. God bless you.